Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of our infinitely compassionate and infinitely merciful Source, we give thanks for this beautiful tradition and for all the helpers who have come throughout the centuries to convey spirit and to encourage us also in that conveyance. We're grateful for these moments of being brought together to witness to those beauties of being. Many beauties of spirit have been conveyed by Sultan Muhammad Veled, both stories of intimate moments with his father and the unfolding of the secrets conveyed by Shams of Tabriz, as well as his own personal experience. And even though we may hear some of the same stories over and over again, inshallah, each time we hear them, they might bring us deeper and bring us new nourishment in that moment. We reflect here on some of the lessons conveyed by Sultan Veled as to how we might be true Khalifas of God, the birthright of every human being. He shares with us examples of standing witness before the infinite, witnessing to that infinite love and translating it, conveying it more fully into this existence with humility, beauty of character, and love and service. As it is said, wherever you turn, there is the face of God. And as Sultan Veled says in his Ma'arif, God did not create the universe and its forms for you to occupy yourself with these forms and fall in love with them, but he created them for you to know him. With that knowledge, we're enabled to stand in truth, witnessing to the majesty of the infinite grace of our loving sustainer, and turning to serve her creation as a true Khalifa, a representative of God, guardian of the trust of being, breath by breath, from the ocean of non-being, conveying pearls to the shore. And Sultan Veled tells us that beautiful story that was related earlier of how he came to his father, and his father said, "Would you like me to show God to you?" And he deepens in that passage of how to distribute the time of our day, and more deeply come into that contemplation of the beloved. Inspired by my father's pure soul, Sultan Veled exclaimed, I followed his instructions, and it is as God said to Moses, his representative, if you are my faithful servant and try to please me, then I, in turn, will be for you as pleases you. Love said to me, set aside your flirtatiousness and desire me with all your heart. Then for you, I will be all that you desire. He relates how Mevlana encouraged him to fast, saying, the faithful one is like a flute. His voice is beautiful when his stomach is empty. Have an empty stomach like the flute, and cry out in longing, and like the empty stomach, speak mysteries like the pen. Have an empty stomach, and like the flute, cry out in longing, and as it is said, spend on others what God has provided for you as sustenance. Die to self, be empty, and be filled with that one, sharing that. He tells us about the time when he was yearning for retreat. And it was shared earlier, all the lights that opened for him. And through those lights, that sense, that understanding of everything is forgiven, except for turning away from me. For I am your beloved. And in that moment of recognition of Mevlana and Sultan Veled and Salahuddin and that beauties that they recognized and that sema that opened, the friends were overflowing with joy and ecstasy. Sultan Veled relates that it was his grandmother, the great Kira of Samarkand, who had encouraged Mevlana in the love of sema. But it was Shams of Tabriz who, according to the records of Aflaki, taught him to turn in a circle, witnessing that oneness. Throughout his youth, Sultan Veled witnessed many semas, some lasting a week or even 40 days. He too was devoted to that way of celebration of divine grace, and in later years always stood in its defense, this joyful worship of God through music, poetry, and whirling. And in the words of the Sagai Ilahi of Sultan Veled, he says, Sema Safa Jana Shifa Ruha Gidadir. Sema is a joy, health for the soul, food for the spirit. He was intimately familiar with mystical states and often present near his father when he was immersed in retreat and deep in ecstasy and worship. He recounts how one night his father was saying his prayers and he was seated beside him, and he says, my father stood up and said, Allah, 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 over and over, and after a while I saw that his blessed mouth was open, but his lips were no longer moving. The words Allah, Allah were now coming from a place deep within his chest. He says, my father opened to me the way of fulfillment, and reminds us of Mevlana's reflection, God grants sustenance unto whom he wills, beyond all reckoning. This refers to those who are the inheritors of the light of Islam, the light of surrender. Mevlana says, we have built pavilions of love in eternity. It was through that love that Mevlana conveyed Sultan Veled as a student to Shams of Tabriz. And as Mevlana told him, referring to Hazrati Shams, O my son, a fakir might bestow just a glance upon you, but this glance can take you to the highest heaven. The sweetness of humility increases the flow of grace. Sultan Veled tells us of that moment when Mevlana was speaking so beautifully about Hazrati Shams and his magnificence that he was just running to the door of Shams and bowed before him and took his hands and rubbed them with his eyes to express his deep friendship. And Shams was astonished by this and said, "Oh, Bahayuddin, you don't show this even to the people of the way." And Sultan Veled replied, "My father described your magnificence in such a way that we've all become crazy with love. And even if I were to live 1,000 years and were devotedly in your service 100 times over, this soul would not be able to fulfill its obligation. My father's words would resonate forever in my heart." He was continually moving between the worlds, translating, bearing witness to the mysteries shared between Mevlana and Shams, soothing those who might be jealous of their time together or missing Mevlana, bridging communication with the friends. And that time when Mevlana and Shams were immersed in retreat for 6 months, it was Sultan Veled and Salahuddin who were the only ones who were allowed to enter. They ascended to the highest. As it said, God will exalt by many degrees those of you who have attained to faith and have been entrusted with true knowledge. And God grants sustenance to whom he wills, beyond all reckoning. وَتَرْزُقُ مَنْ تَشَاءُ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. It was a deep humility that brought Sultan Veled to bring Shams back from Damascus, and as was related, he walked even when invited to ride. Shams reflects, if a mystic gives his heart, he will receive love, like those described in the Quran, people whom he loves and who love him. I have seen nothing more beautiful than humility. It's that journey back from Damascus that we remember in the Devri Veled of the Sema ceremony, that reenactment of the journey of the soul from the moment of the breath of creation through the states of matter into the embodiment of the human being who has the capacity to be the representative of God. Through the unfolding of the turning, aware of the threshold between the worlds of the manifest and the unseen, with right hand raised to receive blessing and left bestowing that grace, flowing through the heart, each semison assists in bringing intensified blessing into this world. Shams once said, Mevlana is like a diver who throws himself into the deep sea, and I am the merchant who buys his pearls. Sultan Veled assisted in the conveyance of those pearls to us, and with Mevlana and Shams demonstrates how to become a pearl diver ourselves. And when they returned to Konya, Shams relates how he gives his secret to Sultan Veled. And he says that even if Baha'u'llah lives as long as Noah, spending his life in devotion and ascetic practice, it would still not be possible to transmit all of my knowledge to him. So he says to Mevlana, I hope he receives some of it from you, lives to be very old, and becomes a great sheikh if it pleases God. After Shams and Mevlana's passing, it's related that when the Mongol Emperor Gergatu Khan met Sultan Veled, he was so impressed with the profundity and elegance of his teaching that with all sincerity of soul he declared himself a disciple. And Sultan Veled put the Mevlevi Sikhe on his head, helping to save Konya from his ravages. They made a pilgrimage to Mevlana's tomb together, and at the time of the noon prayer, Sultan Veled began a sema, saying, let go of this world, because it doesn't belong to you. The breath you breathe is not according to your will. If you happen to gather wealth, don't take pride in it. And your life, remember, it doesn't belong to you. Little by little, a way based on the beautiful teachings of Mevlana and Shams evolved. Sultan Veled welcomed others into this way, a way of love, humility, and service. He relates that Mevlana taught him the speech of paradise, saying, if you wish to live in paradise forever, be a friend to everyone. Don't hold resentment in your heart. When you speak with goodwill about others, you will always be happy, and that happiness is paradise itself. When moments do occur in our lives, when even with those we most love, conflict may arise, Sultan Veled demonstrates how important it can be to be the first to make a step towards reconciliation in love. As his teacher Shams of Tabriz used to say, intellect ties us in knots, but love dissolves those tangles. When a disagreement arose between Sultan Veled and his beloved son Chalabi Arif, it was Sultan Veled who reached out to him, asking a friend to intercede and invite him to a meal that he had prepared. When first they met at his father's tomb, Sultan Veled embraced Arif for a long while and said, "Those whose feet are firmly planted have rejoined the way of conversation and haven't washed their hands of their friends just because a little dust has fallen. No one has ever appeared on earth without the dust of a fault on his cheek." Then when Arif Chalabi was still too embarrassed to eat in front of his father, Sultan Veled withdrew to the balcony, telling them not to pay any attention to him, but from time to time speak so that I can hear and share your joy. A sema was held until the morning, of such intensity that it reminded one of the night of power is better than 1,000 months. Sultan Veled also reminds us that it's not just an ecstatic worship or immersion in inner states that we serve our sustainer, but that our work and service in the world is also important as we stand as Halifas. There's a beautiful story he shares. I hope you'll have the opportunity to discover for yourself one day. But he relates, "My father said, 'O Baha'u'ddin, when the seed of my teaching has taken root in your heart, you will understand. Reflect deeply on my teaching and really try to absorb it. And if you do, felicity will be yours.'" He was absorbed in the mystery described in the Quran. Have you not looked within? There is nothing in the world that exists outside yourself. Look into the depths of your being for that for which you are longing. Sultan Veled tells us, look for God and love him, because he is necessary to all creatures. Noble messengers came to make God's abundance known and to encourage human beings to obey, serve, and adore him. His obedient servants take joy in serving him and thus progress in the hierarchy, the levels of being. And this is the great truth of the matter. The efforts Sultan Veled made, both on the inner and outer realms, have helped to bring to us the gifts of the unseen, establishing a way of love, flowing from the inspiration of Mevlana and Shams, and enhanced by his own deep knowing and purity of being, encouraging us to open our inner sight, that the One might be seen through us. May we also dive into the sea of love and bring forth pearls of the heart to the shores of this existence to share, reminding each other of the infinite radiance of that love as it is expressed in this tradition. May this moment be blessed. May the hearts of the lovers be opened by the breath of our Master Mevlana, by the secret of Shams and Veled, by the generosity of Imam Ali and the intercession of our beloved Prophet Mustafa. May we say, Hu.